Hi, my name is Rhonda Henry. I'm one of the therapists here at the WorkLife office on UK's campus, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the relationship between sleep and mental health. So these two issues have a kind of a dual relationship. They have this bidirectional relationship, and so as we struggle with one, we might find that the other is impacted, and vice versa. We know that sleep is related to both our mental and emotional health. And we're going to break that down a little bit in a few minutes about why that is and what causes that. Research sort of most strongly shows connections and links with issues such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and I'm going to go through some others as well. We'll talk in a little more detail about some of the more common disorders, and then I'll mention some others that may be an issue that you might want to look into further. We know that poor sleep and insomnia can actually lead to or contribute to the beginning of or worsening of a mental health condition. And again, we'll break that down by a couple of different areas. So how is mental health related to sleep? And it's primarily in relation to how our brain is functioning, what our brain needs to be able to be rested, and to sort of function at its best. And when we're not getting sleep, how that impacts us. So we know that throughout the sleep cycle, throughout a sleep session, your brain's going to cycle through these different stages of sleep. Many of us have heard of REM sleep, that deeper level of sleeping, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But every stage that our brain goes through in a sleep cycle, it plays a role in our brain's health. And so our activity sort of ramps up and down during our sleep time. And so that has a real impact on things like thinking, learning, and memory. So a lot of times, we'll feel that sort of foggy feeling after a bad night's sleep. We can't sort of get the word to the tip of our tongue. And that is just because our brain is fatigued. We know, and research shows that brain activity has a strong impact on the mental or on our mental and emotional health. So I mentioned the REM sleep cycle, the REM part of our sleep cycle. That is during that REM cycle, which is that deeper part of our sleep, that is when our brain is processing more emotional information. And so it's that deeper level of processing. Our brain is also working during sleep, to evaluate, to remember things, to kind of categorize memories. We know that lack of sleep is especially harmful in terms of how we're processing and kind of consolidating, how we're remembering positive emotional content. That's really important. For many of us, we know we can recall or sort of pull up a challenging memory or a bad thought about our day. And part of how we sort of integrate the positives in our day and into our memory system is by getting good sleep. And that rest is restorative to our brain and helps us to process and store those sort of broader range of memories more effectively. I think this last point is especially important, knowing that this can influence our mood, our emotional reactivity. And by emotional reactivity, what I mean there is when we find ourselves in a kind of a charged or difficult situation, we want to respond. We may want to say something or do something in response, but we don't want to feel like we're reactive, that we're just kind of acting off the cuff, without giving thought to it. And when we're having trouble with sleep, it makes it more difficult for us to do that. We find ourselves much more reactive. So we may say or do something a little more impulsively than what we would like. It is also tied, though, sleep is also tied to our mental health disorders and their severity. And that last part that I've underlined there, including the risk of suicidal ideas or behaviors. So, this can have some really serious consequences for folks, depending on other things that might be going on for them. But we know that it's more than just a good night's sleep. Feels good, goes a little bit deeper than that. So kind of an old way of thinking about this was that sleep problems were really more of just a symptom of mental health disorders. So, if you're an anxious person, if you've been diagnosed with anxiety, you might feel like, well, that just comes with it. Part of that is sleep problems, or it makes it difficult for me to slow my brain down to sleep. But what more kind of in-depth, more nuanced research has shown is this bidirectional relationship. So the fact that, when we're struggling in one area, it may spark problems in the other. But the other thing that we'll get to in a moment is by kind of improving one area, we also may get some improvement in the other as well. Um, Knowing that sleep problems can be both a cause and a consequence of mental health issues. So when we look at what types of mental health disorders or problems can be impacted by sleep, certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the most common things that we see show up in the research. And there's a part of them that I'm going to go into in a little more depth. So I'm going to go through depression, anxiety, seasonal affective disorder, and ADHD in a little more detail. If schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder, or bipolar disorder are something that you're struggling with, or someone you know is, you might want to research a little more around, what is that connection with sleep? How does it show up? What would be some ways that you might be able to improve both of those areas? If you're getting treatment in those areas, that might be something to talk to your therapist or your doctor about as well. We also know that when we have co-occurring conditions, this may influence, one may influence the other as well as sleep. So what that means is if someone has both depression and anxiety, those two kind of together make their own sort of unique cocktail. And so you might see some influence that looks a little, depression might show up a little differently for somebody who has both depression and anxiety than for someone who only has depression. Sleep also gets tricky in that mix. So again, the more things that we have going on, the more sort of complex and more difficult it can be to piece apart what's being caused by which thing, and how do we sort of treat that holistically. So let's start with depression. We know that depression is primarily marked by those feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And one of the most common things, that folks show is insomnia. We see insomnia is very common among folks who experience depression. And sometimes folks with depression, or many people with depression, also suffer from excessive sleepiness. And so that might show up as daytime sleepiness. That might be hypersomnia. So that means sleeping a whole lot or a whole lot more than you meant to. I'll hear folks, come into me for services, and they'll talk about, I had this intention of doing this all day Saturday, and instead I literally took 3 naps and I just couldn't get up. And so you may see, again, excessive sleep at certain points, but that might also be paired with insomnia when someone's actually wanting to go to sleep. And again, historically, sleep problems were seen as a consequence of depression. So because you're depressed, you're having these sleep disorders, not necessarily kind of looking at it from that other point of view, but that growing evidence suggests that poor sleep may induce or exacerbate depression. Now, this can also get more complicated with sort of situational depression or situational anxiety. So, for example, someone may have long-term depression, and that they've had that for years. They've got that diagnosis. They know that's something that they are dealing with. But they may also be someone. There may also be someone who is typically not struggling with depression, but they've experienced a death. They've went through a divorce. They've had difficulties in their job, and they may be in kind of a episodic sort of depression. And so we especially, I think, see in those episodic times, sleep is really, really difficult. Again, imagine you've lost a loved one or you've went through a really significant breakup. Often sleep disturbance goes hand in hand with that. Sleep problems and depressive symptoms are often mutually reinforcing. So again, think of that example I gave earlier. If somebody is struggling with that sort of daytime sleep, then they can't get to sleep at night. They're feeling worse. They're feeling worse about themselves because they can't do that, or they're not necessarily sticking to a routine they want to. And so we just can get in these cycles, and it can get real hard to figure out, how do I disrupt this? How do I stop having the same sort of experience night after night? And again, we'll get to that in a minute. Some suggestions about some things we might try to do there. I think, for some, it's so helpful to me to keep in mind that focus on improving sleep may actually have some benefit in reducing symptoms of depression. And, as much as the two are, on one hand, they're tied together in that way that they can feel really kind of negative of, as one is increasing, the other is increasing. If we can have some success in treating one, we might see some help and benefit in both areas. Seasonal and affective disorder is a sort of a subset of depression, but I wanted to mention this one because one thing we see within SAD is a disruption to a person's circadian rhythm. So you may have heard about that before, those kind of natural rhythms that our body depends on, that sort of biological clock internally. Think about when when time changes, when we have that hour that we put the clock forward or back. Think about how different you feel during that time. You just kind of feel off. It takes us a while to sort of get into that rhythm. So for folks that have seasonal affective disorder, that tends to be something that we see spike up for most people in the darker, kind of shorter days. You're going to see that more in the fall and winter. And so as we get a little bit out of whack with that, we see an increase in depressive symptoms. And for some folks, they may do medication just during those months because they see that kind of coming up in that sort of episodic way. Um, we also may see seasonal affective disorder. Folks tend to sleep, again, too much or too little. We see those changes in sleep cycles. So I just wanted to include this one, again, pretty basic information on that one, but I think if you've noticed that you may have seasonal affective disorder, kind of seeing how sleep plays in with that, and maybe approaching that, especially as we're coming into fall, maybe approaching that a little bit differently this year. Anxiety is, I think, one thing that we probably most commonly associate with sleep difficulty. Often folks that have an anxious brain will report, that feeling that you just can't turn it off. When everything else gets quiet, um, it's hard to kind of get away from your own thoughts. So I hear from a whole lot of folks that are ruminating when they're trying to fall asleep. They get really sort of focused in on maybe, things that they said and did throughout the day. They may be focused on things they said or did 10 years ago. And so the mind just kind of looks for something to focus on and to sort of worry with. That worry and fear are what put us in that place of hyperarousal. That mind is racing, we just can't stop thinking. And we know that hyperarousal, when the mind is going quick, it's going to be a huge part of insomnia. Now, for some folks, that shows up as they can't fall asleep in the first place. So they've done all the right things. They've got the room ready. We'll talk about sleep habits in a moment, but they've got everything ready. They lay down to go to sleep. They're feeling tired, and they can't go to sleep. And they're thinking and thinking and thinking, and there's nothing to distract them from that. For some folks, they're able to fall asleep, but they find that they wake during the night. And whether that's just a short getting resettled in bed or getting up for a drink or a restroom break, they find they can't get back to sleep at that point. And, I'll have a lot of folks will say, if I get 2 or 3 hours of sleep in and then I wake up, I've had just enough that I'm not so sleepy. I can't really get back to sleep. And then they end up often just awake for these big chunks of time in the middle of the night, which also brings a lot of feelings of anxiety and worry and frustration. We also see anticipatory anxiety in that situation. So when you know that you're going to, you've been struggling with sleep and it's likely you're going to have another night of struggling with sleep, you start to anticipate that. You start to worry about the problem with sleeping, which again just adds to the whole cycle. We also know there's a very strong relationship between PTSD and sleep difficulty. Folks with PTSD are often replaying negative or painful events in their mind. So they may have nightmares, experience that sort of feeling of being on alert. And we know PTSD can come from a variety of traumatic background experiences. Sometimes we only think of that in terms of military service, something like that. But it also comes with abusive situations, domestic violence, child abuse, any kind of traumatic event where we were overwhelmed and our ability to cope wasn't what it needed to be, can result in PTSD. And so, knowing that that is going to put us even at more risk for that. Also, for some folks who experience PTSD, nighttime was not a safe time, again, for a variety of reasons. And so even the thought of a dark room, drawn curtains, that sort of thing, for some people that feels very comforting. For some people who've maybe had a traumatic experience related to nighttime, that may feel really threatening and scary. And I think that's part of where when we talk about some things we can do with this, we can dig into that a little bit in therapy. ADHD is another phenomenon that is impacted by sleep. And this one, it can again show up in those same ways: difficulty falling asleep, frequent awakening during the night, or excessive daytime sleepiness. So again, you see some of those themes that you've seen show up in a couple of different things that we've talked through here. And I think that, we know also that there's other sleep issues that can come up, such as sleep apnea and restless leg syndrome. And so those also can be higher in folks with ADHD. Those can also disturb our sleep or cause us to have really restless or unproductive sleep. And so knowing that, again, not only does this sleep problem maybe is a consequence of ADHD, but those sleep problems themselves are further aggravating the underlying issue of poor attention span or behavior problems that are going on. Again, that cycle that we want to find a way to disrupt. So what can we do? This is where folks like me come in, is we're folks that, can help talk through this and come up with a treatment plan. So I think, treatment for both mental health issues and sleep problems can go hand in hand, and I think ideally would go hand in hand. If we're seeing a connection, then we really want to kind of track both of those things and see if interventions that we're doing are having a positive impact. I think with most sleep interventions, you want to you got to give it some time. It's not going to be a one night. I tried doing this one thing different and it changed everything. That's great if it does, but if it doesn't, that doesn't mean that it's a failure or that it won't work. Well, I would think give it a week, at least a good week of different habits to continue building and then starting to kind of see and track, are we seeing an improvement? Um, every situation is different, so any of the things that I'm suggesting, as I said, I'm a therapist. That's the point of view I'm coming from. But there are different professionals in your circle that can definitely help with different aspects of this. That may be your doctor, depending on, whether it's your family doctor or primary care doctor, or a specialist if you have something else going on. It may be talking to a therapist like myself. It may be talking to a psychiatrist about medication, whether that's side effects of mental health medications, or potential other sleep medications, or it could be talking to a health coach, and we have that available here at UK. I'll talk about that at the end. So the two of the more kind of common ways that we approach sleep issues are through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just talk therapy. That's what most of us are familiar with. You sit down with the therapist, we ask you what's going on, we talk about where our thoughts are going, and maybe some different ways to restructure that. The other that we see really, really often are these sort of tips about improving sleep habits. And I think that's been talked about earlier in this series, and there's so much good information out there about it. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. These are all good things. So, having the dark room, the cool temperature, the comfortable bedding, those are all good and legitimate things. If you haven't honed in on those, that is a good place to start. Is getting some routines and some sleep habits in place that we know are good because the research supports it, the science supports it. It's good for our body, it's good for our brain. So try these things if we haven't already done them. The next place that I'm going to go to, though, is when we try some of those things and it's still not working, because that's often when I end up seeing people is they've done all the stuff and they'll come tell me that, I've got the cold room, the lights are down, I don't have my phone anywhere near me, all the stuff, and yet I'm still struggling and I can't get good sleep. And so the next couple of slides are going to be how I approach this with my clients. And it's not to say again that it's the only approach, it's just one way that I've found works for some folks. So I think part of it is shifting our mindset in terms of our goal is to get better sleep, but not perfect sleep, because it's going to get really hard to go from this horrible sleep. If we're at that point of we're struggling to fall asleep, we're waking during the night, we're staying awake when we get up during the night, we've developed some anticipatory anxiety because we're worrying about how bad sleep's going to be. And we're hoping to get down to that other end of the continuum there, that best sleep. Who doesn't want to fall asleep easily, not wake up during the night, and feel rested when you get up? That sounds like heaven for most of us. It's going to be really hard to get from 1 to 5 in one sort of leap. We're going to have some incremental change along the way. So what I try to focus on with the clients I'm working with is what can we do to move us up that scale? If I can't get from a 1 to a 5, this week, can I somehow get from a 1 to a 2 or a 1 to a 3 or a 2 to a 3? So let's focus in on what can we do to have better sleep? Again, not necessarily perfect, not necessarily the solid 8 hours that everyone recommends that we need to get, but how do we break some of these cycles and patterns? So as I mentioned, we want to start with strengthening those sleep habits. If you haven't tried those, or if there's some that you've kind of known, but yeah, I know I shouldn't have my phone in here, but I'm still doing it, try those. Again, they're there for a reason. The science backs them up. Stick with mental health care routines. So if you're on medication for a mental health issue, taking your medication regularly, taking it at the same time, following instructions on how you're supposed to take it with food at bedtime, those sort of things, keeping therapy appointments, but that goes for any of those helping folks that I mentioned earlier, doctor's appointments, your health coaching appointments. This takes a little while to kind of work through this problem. And so that consistency and that discipline to stick with some of these things that we're trying is really going to be most likely to pay off. This is a time to definitely consider sort of practicing mindfulness. If that's something you've been interested in, if you don't know a whole lot about it, or you've kind of been curious about it, If you're having sleep issues, I think it's a really good place to try to kind of bring some of that in. And my shorthand in mindfulness is being present with our thoughts without judging them. And so that might mean, okay, it's 2 a.m. and I woke up and now I can't get back to sleep. I'm not going to lay here in bed and toss and turn and fight with my blankets and beat myself up about why can't I just get to sleep and watch the clock. I'm going to do something different with that. Having self compassion, approaching it from a self compassionate place. It's hard when I can't get good sleep at night. Not that I'm bad, not that I'm broken, not that I have to beat myself up over it, but how can I treat this with some self compassion and just be present with what's going on while I'm trying to work on making it better? This next idea of sort of embracing rest even when you can't sleep. So, again, think of that 5 point scale. Can we move from a 1 to a 2 if we wake up during the night and if we can't get back to sleep, give yourself that sort of 10 minutes or so. Can I recapture sleep at this point? And if it just feels like you can't, maybe it will be more restful to move to the recliner in your living room for a while. Maybe it will feel better to wrap up in a blanket and lay down on your couch and read a book for a few minutes. If you're living with a partner or sleeping with a partner, you may not want to have the light on in the bedroom, if you're going to read, those sort of things. Is there a way to make, if I'm going to be awake for an hour, is there a way to make that hour less stressful, less difficult? Again, we don't necessarily want to engage something that's going to really sort of bring our brain to life. We aren't looking to do, something super engaging or exciting, but is there some way that we can be in a different space and maybe get a little bit of rest, even if it's not sleep at that point? Would that move us closer to that better sleep? Some folks really need calming distractions. I have a lot of people who will come to me and talk about, I know I'm not supposed to have my phone in the bedroom, or I'm not supposed to go to sleep with the TV on. And yes, all things sort of being even, those are some of the healthy sleep habits. But when I'm talking with somebody who's got maybe a background and has PTSD and they've got a background of trauma, they may need that audio piece to bring them some comfort and to get out of their head a little bit. My thought is, if you can fall asleep to the TV and actually get a few hours of sleep that way, is that better than where you were before? Again, that may not be the landing place where we want to stop and where it's all solved. Maybe we want to get to that place where, yes, I can fall asleep on my own or I don't have to have that. But you know what? If it isn't, and if you listen to, a podcast or a TV show in the background while you're falling asleep, is that an okay thing? Is that a place to be compassionate with yourself about what you need? And the fact that those kind of general healthy habits may not be the right fit for you all the time. I have a lot of folks who really like something that's got some audio to it, so that again they've got some distraction for their brain, nothing hugely engaging. Some folks will sleep with one earbud in if they have a partner. They'll leave the TV going. If they read before bed, one thing I would suggest, I'll ask them about what kind of books do you read? So is it something new and you can't wait to finish a chapter? Maybe it's the time to kind of pull out an old favorite book, something that you don't have to feel that urgency to read through, but you can kind of read and let yourself doze off. Same thing with TV. Think about, the series that gives you, his comfort, that you don't have to pay attention to. You're not watching the new episode of something. I can't begin to tell you how many people fall asleep to either The Office or Friends or The Big Bang Theory. Those seem to be the most popular ones I hear about. And then think about other things going on sort of with your body during that time. For a lot of folks, especially with anxiety, a weighted blanket can be helpful. It really kind of calms our nervous system. That could be a whole other presentation about why those work, but something like a weighted blanket, maybe changing up what you're wearing at nighttime. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, making sure you've got something that feels good on your body. So again, even if I'm not getting the best sleep ever, is there something I can do to make that time, that period of time, more comfortable, more restful, more soothing? Is there a different place that would be more comfortable? And again, for some folks, bedrooms can sometimes be really associated with trauma. And so, does it feel better to sometimes, if I'm struggling with a rough night of sleep, maybe I'm going to the couch, maybe I'm going to my spare bedroom. Think about rearranging your bedroom. I talk to a lot of folks about this after a breakup because there's just a lot of memories in the bedroom when we've been with an intimate partner. So think about moving things around, just shifting, what wall your bed is on, where the lamps are in the room, making it feel different. It doesn't have to be a thing that you spend a lot of money on, but changing that environment some. Again, think of those healthy sleep habits as kind of the starting point, but some of these points to me speak a little more to individually what is sort of underneath what's going on there. So let's talk for a minute about some resources because, along with those suggestions I made on the previous page, we want to be working on, if there's other again, mental health issues that we want to get some support in, we want to be kind of doing those in collaboration with one another. So we've got resources here on campus, which are just wonderful. I can't say enough great things about the folks over at Health and Wellness. And we have Be Well Health Coaching. The information is there where you can find them online, or you can just kind of go into the UK system and Google health coaching under HR, and you'll find their page. That they do a lot of really good work around sleep disturbance. Amy is fantastic, and has always just been a really good colleague in this way, in this area in particular. So if that feels like something that could be useful, just to kind of sit down and think this through in a little more detail, talk with Amy or some of the folks over at Be Well. And then also there's the Sleep Rate app. And so this is available for free for folks with a UK Link Blue ID. The long email address or the long web address, sorry, is there. Same thing though, if you go on the UK site and just put in Sleep Rate app, it's going to take you to the right page so you can sign up for that. So it is free. And so again, if it's not something you've tried before, give it a try. You don't have anything to lose there. There's no financial cost. And give it a try for a couple of weeks and see if you notice some difference. And then this is my office. So I am part of the WorkLife Connections group. We provide free confidential counseling for all employees as well as their dependents and retirees. And so you can see us 5 times per year. So there's 5 sessions per year that you get for free. We do individual counseling. We do not do couples counseling. We're currently doing a mix of both telehealth and in-person sessions. So whatever you prefer, we all are offering those as an option. And then we do other programming. So, programs like this, we do other groups and events, that sort of thing. That's the general information at the bottom there to be able to make an appointment. The number at the bottom is to our administrative assistant. So if you need some help kind of navigating that online scheduling system, just give her a call. She'll be happy to work through that with you. There are 4 of us who are on full time here at UK, and then we've got a few contract therapists as well. And so you can see all of that at our website. And then the final thing I wanted to mention is the great podcast that just celebrated its 1-year anniversary, Becoming Wildly Resilient. So the August episode is going to be about sleep, and we've had some other really good episodes this past year. So check it out. You can find it on any of the major platforms where you listen to podcasts, and you can also find it here at this web address. Hopefully this has been helpful. If it feels like you would like to maybe talk about this a little bit more, give one of us a call, get in touch with us, whether it's me, whether it's the folks over at Health and Wellness, whether it's your primary care doctor. There are folks who can help with this. And so just let us know and we can work out a plan with you. Bye-bye.